Hi, friends. Welcome to Igniting Imagination. I'm your host, Lisa Greenwood, and joining me is my co host for this season, Reverend Kathi McShane. Hey, Kathi.
Hi, Lisa. It's good to be here with you.
And also joining us is our executive producer for this podcast, the Reverend Dr. Blair
Oh,
Thompson.
yes. Hello.
Hey, Blair. So, Blair is also our Vice President for Learning and Innovation at Wesleyan Impact Partners and Texas Methodist Foundation. She's usually our behind the scenes genius for our
Mm,
podcast.
brother.
But for our final episode for this season, we thought it would be fun for Blair to join us and to ask a few questions to help us reflect on our experience and learnings through these amazing conversations. So, with that brief introduction, let's jump in. Take it away, Blair.
Yes, thank you. So, to recap, and listeners, if you haven't listened to the 5 episodes this season, we just highly recommend each one. Each conversation is focused on a theme we believe is critical for the future church, but is also happening right now. So, hospitality, power, place, small boats or experiments, joy. Here's my first question to you two, and I imagine it may be one that is shared by our listeners. And I think it was Reggie Blunt, one of our esteemed guests in our episode about place. He put it bluntly.
Uh,
See what I did there?
yes,
Get
yeah.
it? When he said, "This is nothing new." So, is there anything new here for us with these themes? Like, haven't we heard everything there is to hear about hospitality already? And don't we know to care for our neighbors and so on? So, tell us, why should we care about these not new to us themes? Kathi, you want to start?
Sure. You know, we have heard all these themes before, certainly on a institutional or macro level. We do know about all these things. There is nothing new under the sun in some ways. But each of these people, when they talked about this work and the topic that they were engaged in with us on a micro level, right? In the context of their own work, their own sort of faithful and intellectual engagement, it was quite a different thing, right? To talk about things on an institutional level is very different than talking about them on a personal level.
Hmm.
So I think, despite the fact that that we knew these themes going in, every one of these conversations was inspiring in a way that, frankly, I didn't expect. And so I think I take from that there is still a lot to be learned, even about the things we think we know cold.
Yes, yes. I agree completely with that. In that, when we had these conversations, one, we chose the people intentionally because we thought they were folks who embodied these qualities and also thought about them. So both thinkers and practitioners, and we saw that to be true when we had these conversations. And so Reggie, just as an example, comes in with all this humility about, this isn't new, and yet I left that conversation with such a sense of new eyes to see what he and Bill Lamar were talking about. Like, really a new way of experiencing what place meant as very central to our theology and our practice of the gospel. And when we had the conversation about hospitality and understood it as like being attuned to one another, I was like, ooh, and this word attunement, right? And I could do that for each one of these themes, that I felt like um, that I walked away from these conversations with a new way of looking at each of these themes and a new way of understanding, and even like handholds. So not 30,000 foot view, but a really practical and poignant understanding of what it means to live this out in the church today. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I really appreciate that, and it's, in some ways drawing attention to these themes. It's almost like, what you measure is what you pay attention to
Mhm.
kind of thing, and
Yes.
I think that they're all inviting us to double down on paying attention in our context, and then we're
Mhm.
exegeting these ideas again
Yes.
for the current time in which we're living and in the ministry opportunities we have in front of us. So, what hospitality looked like 2 decades ago is not necessarily what it looks like now,
Right.
and not necessarily the kinds of conversations we need to be having about it now.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Yeah. I think that's right.
You both travel a lot and a lot. Let's underscore that. And have a lot of frequent flyer miles and opportunities to be present in all kinds of religious and spiritual spaces with leaders from all over. And I think it'd be so helpful to hear an experience or a conversation that you've had recently that expands or deepens our understanding of these themes. Like, how have you seen these themes play out in the places that you have visited in recent days? Lisa, you want to start?
Hmm. Okay, I'll jump in. Um, hmm. So just a couple of weeks ago, I got to attend a conference, Fishing Differently, that our friends Reggie Blunt and Sydney Williams co-created Oikos Institute, and they're really helping congregations think about their assets in new ways. And integral to the whole experience of the conference was worship. Throughout the experience, there were it was like every plenary speaker was actually a preacher, right? That's what it felt like, whether it was
Mhm.
the lunchtime speaker or actually the worship preacher. It all felt like an intentional experience that was full of joy, but not ignoring the very real challenges of what it means to be the church today. So, authentic, joyful, intentionality around hospitality and how folks were welcomed and seen and heard and had space to be their full selves. Like so many of these themes that we talked about during these conversations were very present in this event. And I thought, okay, this this is an embodiment of these very themes that we've been talking about. Um, and then another one came to mind. uh, I had the opportunity last December, and we'll go again this December, to an event called Flourishing Neighborhoods, hosted by the New York Fed. And I think just even saying that the New York Fed is hosting an event about flourishing neighborhoods, and in that room there are people of faith, there are educators, there are city planners and developers, and nonprofits and for profits, like in a room, and talking about how place matters and how power matters and relationships matter, and that maybe the way we have viewed neighborhoods has been through a kind of white supremacy lens, and this kind of unfolds it in some new ways of approaching who owns what and how do we care for our neighbor. And I would call that a very gospel perspective, even though of course in this event they're not necessarily coming from a gospel perspective. But I just think there's some very tangible ways that these themes are very real in the culture, that I think draws the church into this conversation and compels us not to be silent because we have something to offer this moment.
Mm.
Kathy, what about you?
My answer is going to be similar to yours, Lisa, in that I could just about any event that I've
Hmm.
been to or conversation I've had in the last months, I could reference in this answer. And also that it's really every one of these themes that shows up in
Mhm.
all of these places. I'll name a couple of things next to each other because they're so different from one another. I had a conversation just last week with Heather Kilburn, who is the director of a project called Faith in Rural Communities in North Carolina, and she really is helping coaching congregations, small rural congregations, in sort of reshaping themselves to be sources of community impact wherever they are. And really every one of these themes that we have talked about in this season of these podcasts showed up in some way: power, hospitality, the place, the importance of a particular place, small boats, all of that. It was in there. I saw something similar in quite a different event that I attended a couple of months ago. Was a retreat put on by the Center for Christianity and Public Life that runs out of Washington, D.C. I was there as a mentor to their fellows, all of whom are engaged in public life in some way, often political life, either as elected officials or appointed staff in the political system, sometimes as academics. And again, it seems like every one of these issues that we've talked about in this season is there in the encouragement that this Center for Christianity and Public Life gives them to use their position, their power responsibly and in a way that brings the values of a gospel life into the public sphere. So I think there is something happening in the world. All of this makes me think that there is hope when we think there is none, because there are good people and creative thinking and a lot of patience and persistence that are happening out there in taking what we have, what we know, what we are building from to make good happen. It's hard to, in this work that you and I get to do, all three of us get to do, to not be hopeful, I think.
Yeah, and so I'm thinking about, and I don't know which language it is, but isn't there something? Here I am, right? With I have you introduced me with a demon, and I don't like that, because it's like I should know something like this. But so I'm looking to you all. But isn't there like a language where God is translated as something is happening, or there, and and so that's, I think there is something in this where the things that you're describing, the places where you've been, there's an energy that's present,
Yes.
and it's the energy of the spirit, because, and I'll share a contrast, and I shall not name details, but was present at a worship experience this past year that was not attentive to any of those five themes that we mentioned. Not attentive to hospitality, or really inattentive to space and place and connection with people, and the lack of attention led to what was obviously a lack of spirit in the room.
Mm,
And so it was
right.
like we were just going through the motions of
Mm,
worship, but it was not connecting in any way, and so you left there feeling drained, not energized, and such a contrast to the worship you described. And then I got to also experience the fishing differently, where it's like, I'm ready to go serve
yes.
Jesus, like, let's go. And so again, I think that's a question of like, where is the energy? And you typically see energy when these themes are engaged regularly with people from all kinds of backgrounds and experiences.
Yes.
But if we together can co-create spaces where these things are happening, like the spirit will show up for that. So okay, next question for you all, and a little behind the scenes. So after we finish each recording, there is usually a 10-minute time of uploading to the cloud, and so that's usually when we discuss our reactions to the conversation, or we jump in. I get to ask more questions that didn't get to be discussed on the recording, but that we really want to kind of have conversation around. So sometimes we wish those 10 minutes
Right.
were actually recorded. But it's interesting how in those times we get the opportunity to see each other's reactions more. And so I've noticed a couple of those. So for each of you, so Lisa, I'll start with you. You had a real connection with that conversation about joy. with Tyler and Rich, episode 5 of this season. So I'm just wondering if you might share a little bit of your reflections on it at this point, several weeks later here. Why do you think that conversation about joy was so meaningful to you?
Yeah. Wow. So Blair is inviting me into one of my hardest places, and that is like I had a kind of an emotional reaction to joy and I mean to that whole podcast and that conversation that we had with Tyler and Rich. It was beautiful and it was challenging for me because in a good way, in a really poignant, helpful way, because my life is crazy full, my calendar's crazy full, and I can let it squeeze out the joy. And so sometimes I find myself struggling to access joy. And what Tyler and Rich did in that conversation is invite us to something that is so much deeper and more authentic of an experience of joy, and that is in the midst of the very real calendar and the very real emotions that come up. Now, I know this is a spiritual issue for me. I know, right? As an Enneagram 3, I know that my spiritual work is being present in the moment. And that's what I heard them say. Like, be present. Like that welcoming prayer and if you haven't listened, I hope y'all will go back and listen to this. But the the welcoming prayer is one that I had been in the habit of doing a number of years ago and had sort of lost touch with and sight of, and but welcoming the very real emotions and letting the joy be in the midst of that welcoming, and the intentional uh, efforts and even rituals that Tyler and Rich have built into their relationship reminded me that brings very real joy. And so I did. I had a kind of a meaningful, poignant reaction to that conversation. Was so grateful. Um, yeah, grateful to be a part of it.
Yeah, thanks for sharing
Yeah.
that. Um, and so, Kathy, the conversation I noticed that you spoke into most, or that kind of most sparked you, was not surprisingly the one that you wrote a whole book about, power. And so we had two, and we've talked about this a fair bit among us, but we had two very different approaches to power from our guests that for that episode, Elon and Vipin, and both are very good friends of yours and leaders you've worked with for years. And so I just wonder how, being good friends with them and seeing from their different perspectives, how has it shaped you and shaped your view of power?
I'm so glad you asked this question, Blair, because it invites me to reflect on what I've learned from both of these good friends in my life. I've known Vipin for 6 years. He was my partner in beginning the Changemaker Initiative. Um, and and Vipin at least when we started our work together, he was really not particularly familiar with Christianity. He did not come from the Christian tradition, and he was very much an observer of it, particularly United Methodist Christianity. And so he stands back and he takes a very big and sort of outside view, which can sometimes lead him to be an inquisitor about it, but often allows him to see beauty that just slides right by me,
Hmm.
right? And in a very different way, Elon, who has been my friend for almost as long and my co-author, and so a deep heart friend to me, um, Elon acts from outside the Christian tradition too. He is very centered in the Jewish tradition that he is from and that he practices very devoutly. And the Jewish tradition is almost the opposite of the way I just described Vipin's role, because in the Jewish tradition, and particularly in what I see and hear in Elon, he dwells in it in a very small place, right?
Hmm.
The Jewish tradition is about going deeply into a small place, right?
Mhm.
Poring over a word sometimes
Mm.
of, of God's presence among us. So the two of them together, in some ways, it's like a satellite picture of Earth and next to, a high resolution photograph of one leaf, right? And they both have beauty. And I spend a lot of my life stuck in between, appreciating neither, right? Because I'm so
Mm.
in it on a day-to-day basis. So both of them have in my life and do still, they sort of disrupt my point of view, which
Hmm.
I appreciate very much.
Yeah, thanks, Kathy. And thanks, Lisa. The insights into your personal reactions to some of these conversations is so valuable. So thank you for opening up for us here. Okay, so you're both remarkable leaders. I mean, we see it all the time in the ways that you're leading and the way that you're sharing, even here today. So, but you're in very different spaces at times. So, Lisa, President and CEO, Kathy, Director of Learning, Innovation, and Senior Pastor of a small church in California, which folks may not know. So, I'm just wondering, what from these conversations will you take back with you to your particular context? What will you try out? Maybe you're already doing this. I'm curious how it's going. Maybe you're trying it out with me and I don't know it. So let me in on this here.
Well, I've already, shown my cards, if you will, about the importance in my spiritual work of the importance of paying attention and being present. And so I really am, um, with some great intentionality in my work, my home, meetings, thinking about what it means to be present, to pay attention, to be real, to not gloss over, emotional reactions, those sorts of things. And, I mean, we know that the most important thing we can do is tend to our relationships. And I know that. And I want to not check that at the door of my everyday work. That's the most important thing I can do is to have these conversations with my colleagues, with that it's not all about the tasks, that it really is about our souls, our well-being, our connection to each other. And um, so I feel like that's such an obvious thing. Like I know this, but I tell you, it has been renewed for me in this season. And I will say that the other piece of that has been what we observed right at the beginning, um, is that by interrogating, if you will, these themes with these folks, I have seen how we can see new facets of an old thing. And so that has reminded me that curiosity is so critical to not just assuming I know what somebody means about being hopeful or being, generous or, I mean, fill in the blank, that just asking one more question might uncover a new understanding and connection with each other. So I hope that will be true.
That's good. So good. And you, I'm not just saying this. You do this so well. I mean, I feel like I've learned so much from you about this. Because I tend to, my first reaction is judgment, not
Oh,
grace. I'm still trying to work on leaning towards
uh,
grace, but my initial reaction is always judgment. So I have to kind of pause and try to be a better human. And I love, the, what is it, Kelly Corrigan? Tell me more.
yeah,
Like that's her. I
yeah,
think she wrote a whole book about it, and
mhm,
that's such a posture of
yeah,
curiosity. Like, oh, tell me more.
yeah.
I mean, if only I would ask that question, but that's a good one to lean into that curiosity. So, Kathy, what about you? What's been sticky for you that you're trying out in your different contexts?
Yeah, I'm conscious that in our work this year at TMF and WI, we talk a lot about formation as being the
Mm,
critical thing, and really sort of the work that everything else comes back to, our formation as spiritual beings, people of faith. So maybe that's the lens that I was
Mm.
hearing all these podcast guests through. But it seemed to me that every one of them was a remarkable person, not only because they were incredibly intelligent and articulate and uh, all those things, good at what they do, but because they were so intentionally formed as faithful persons.
Mm.
Mm.
And that matters. It matters so much to me, and generally, I think. I think all three of us have heard Bishop Gregory Palmer uh, kind of express this as the work of the church. He says, we must discover again the vocation of being full-time Christians. And that stays with me. And particularly now that I've taken on leadership of this small church, it is
Mm.
what I want for the people who come to that church
Yeah.
as lay people. It's what I want for the leaders we work with. That being deeply formed as followers of Jesus and people of faith, and whether they have theological language even to articulate their longing for it, or much less the answers to
Mhm.
anything.
Mhm.
Um, so I carry that with me all the time, and I acknowledge, both in my own leadership and I think in the church in general, we've got a long way to go before we are doing that work well.
Um, well, it just occurs to me, and we've talked about this, that the church has a need for elders, and people who recognize their role as elders, not being in any sense of ordination, but in sense of on the spiritual journey, having been formed to a certain degree, that they now, instead of seeking kind of higher office, if you will, or instead of seeking higher positions of power, have recognized that their role is to walk alongside those next generations and invite that sort of um, wisdom, not even conveyor, but just supporter in the work. And I recognize that all of our guests this season, whether they're by age or not, we had a nice diversity of ages, that they each had kind of a sense of eldership, if you will,
Mhm.
like just having that perspective of wanting to be with in the most deepest sense,
Yes.
and sharing what they know and have experienced in a way that's truly that shared power that you talk a lot about, Kathy.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's a beautiful image because I think you're right. With all the different ages that were represented, there is a kind of uh, wisdom, but also this sense of accompaniment.
Mhm.
Yeah. All right. So let's say that we did another episode and explored a sixth theme. What would it be? I mean, what did we miss here? What's another theme that's critical to the future church that's also happening right now? Kathy, you want to start?
Sure. I want to say that it's something about being in the wilderness. That maybe a episode that's about what do you do in an extended time in the wilderness now? What should be our stance in this time when we are really the church, and we as leaders, and we who have a vision for what the movement of Christianity can be in the world, what shall we do now in this in between space? My book writing partner, Elon Babchak, has this really lovely thing he says sometimes, which is that we are now writing with our lives the stories that will become part of scripture in the future. And so if we think of our living and our work now, which to me definitely seems outside of anything we have known before and not yet in any promised land, right? What is the scripture that's being written with our lives now? I think I'd want to have a couple people reflect on that together.
So there is, gosh, what power in that notion of thinking of our lives as writing the stories that become future scripture, and a little dangerous for me to think. I wouldn't want to live in that headspace because I'm afraid I would constantly be looking at my life and saying, "What am I doing? And is it the right?" And that's, I know, an Enneagram 3 has a danger anyway of not being present in the moment, but really thinking, how are others perceiving? But I love this notion of wandering and in the wilderness in a way where we are being formed and shaped and holding loosely to what is. And Kathi, you and I didn't talk about what a sixth theme might be. And what I wrote down was surrender.
Mm.
And this, I'm thinking about what Susan Beaumont has offered in the liminal season and a new kind of leadership that is needed, and that it's less about striving, if you will, and more about a kind of letting go. And what is it that God is doing, and paying attention to what it is that God is doing in me and around me, and what is it that I need to be holding lightly to, less control, less directing, and more surrender in a kind of open-hearted sort of way. And uh, and I think when we embrace wilderness, that's what we do,
Mhm.
and allow ourselves to be formed and shaped. Uh, yeah, I think there's something about surrender. And let me say this: I wonder if I would have said that before that we did the
Mm.
podcasts, right? Or if that's what emerged as I
Yeah.
listened and thought about power and thought about joy and thought about hospitality, and that in that there is a holding lightly and a surrendering, a kind of um, well, I've said it, but letting go of a sense of needing to control or direct.
Oh, that sounds awful to me.
I know, I know, right? I know, right? Blair, I'm curious if you have had a sixth theme come up
Oh,
for
I
you.
wasn't planning on answering this question, but it does, I think, when you're in the wilderness, pulling on what you all just said, and you are surrendering, I think, what is it when you're in crisis? The word crisis is like to sift. And so there's a
Mm,
sifting that happens. And so there
mm,
becomes a clarity of what's most important, a clarity of purpose. And I think uh, that's happening right now. I mean, there's a potential for it, at least, that in the midst of all the change and all the volatility of our worlds, anxiety, that we actually can take a step back and take a deep breath and become much more clear about what our ultimate purpose is, as individuals, as congregations. So yeah, I can see clarity of purpose being important.
You both raised for me what I think it feels like a theme in the actual episodes of this season, which is that really that holding everything lightly, right? There's nothing, almost nothing we know and have done before that we got to anchor ourselves with, right? Everything we do better. We're more faithful. We can move more nimbly if we hold everything lightly.
and so that makes it that much more important that we are rooted in our faith, right? Rooted in our relationship with God, rooted in our tradition, so that we can hold lightly to what's happening right now.
Mm.
Yeah.
It's that great image of the tabernacle, right? And the Ark of the Covenant. It's not like the Israelites kept their rootedness
Hmm.
in their relationship with God, but it moved too with them,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
Rootedness doesn't mean you don't move necessarily.
Mm.
Yeah.
How interesting. Yeah, I love that. And I just again want to name the challenge that when times get hard, the instinct is to just hold tighter, and so
Yes. Yes.
that's the challenge in the moment.
And stay in one
Yeah,
place and
exactly, like,
yes, yes,
get those boundaries and barriers up and kind of protect self-preservation, right? Which is we're
right,
seeing that too, and, it's interesting. I was just thinking we could do a whole series on, like, the things that we see now that are not helpful, like, what are the and I think self-preservation would be one of those, right? Of
right.
yeah.
Yeah.
Institutional self-preservation too. Okay, we're gonna do rapid fire. Are y'all ready? Let's see how you do. It's one thing to be the one asking the rapid fire questions and to sort of be in a
Right.
place of judging those who receive them and then go very long in their supposed short answer questions. So let's see how you all do with these rapid fires. I'll start with Lisa. So complete the sentence. In 20 years, the mainline church in America will.
Be a vibrant expression of the gospel in a mixed ecology of those expressions, small boats, if you will.
Very good. And I mean, you would never say this, but Lisa did write an incredible paper in 2019 that is still very relevant today. And we'll put a link to that in our show notes. It's about the mixed ecology. And, really, I think in 2019 it was prophetic. And today it just still very much, it's what's happening, it's what we're seeing. So, okay. What about you, Kathy? In 20 years, the mainline church in America will.
Yeah, and I want to put this in the context of Lisa's answer that she just gave. I think as an institution, the mainline church will be even less powerful than it is today. But I mean that in a good way, that it will look like cells of faithful people who are committed um, to generous action in the world. It'll be sort of a stripped down to its essence, like islands of sanity, to use the phrase of
Mhm.
Robert Whately. That's what I see. More focus on the local church, less on the institutional church.
Yes. All right, next rapid fire, and we'll start with Kathy this time. So, when we think about that future church that we've been imagining through this season, so what would be a priority of a leader of a local congregation today? What should be a priority that they have right now that's aligned towards that future church?
Yeah. I think it's all about spiritual formation, right? Linking what a church does, what a congregation does in its community, what individuals do, all of our encouraging action in the world, linking it very clearly to theology. Right? I think that's what we're missing right now in the church often is that very direct connection between theology and action.
Nice. Lisa, what about you?
Yes. So I would say twofold. One is the formation piece, which feels so critical. And I won't repeat all that Kathy said so beautifully. And so it's that how we're being formed uh, as individuals and congregations, and then expanding our imagination for what's possible, innovating, experimenting, iterating, trying things that are different. So I would say that two of those, I would hope every local faith community would be doing
Great.
all the time.
And then, last rapid fire, one book or podcast or other resource that you've consumed in recent days and months that's shaped your thinking, Kathy.
In some ways, this was the hardest question to think about in advance because there are so many, and I can't think of one that has actually particularly shaped my thinking. But I'll tell you the two books that are most recently pulled from my stack and are in my hands. I carry them around with me, hoping for a few minutes to grab. One is Samuel Wells' A Future That's Bigger Than the Past, which is
Hmm.
sort of in Sam Wells' beautiful, collected, elegant way of writing, really an argument for the church to change its place in our society and really starting with a rethinking of what we think of as salvation, the purpose of the church's
Hmm.
work. It's deep, profound, and meaningful, and is really shaping my thinking right now. The other
Mm.
one is a book by James Hollis called "Living an Examined Life: Wisdom for the Second Half of the Journey," and I picked this up because our friend Matt Russell recommended it to me. He's using it in a Sunday school class in his church that has 200 people in it every Sunday morning. And so I was curious about what draws them. And and he phrases it as learning to live a mature Christian life. So curious about that.
Oh, it's so good. Thanks for that. What about you, Lisa?
So, so I'll name two. I know you asked for one, but I'm going to try to narrow down. So, I I almost always have a fiction or fun nonfiction book going that I'm listening to on Audible, and so I almost always have that running. And right now, I'm listening to My Brilliant Friend, and it's a well, I won't go into it all, but just worth looking up and encountering, as it's one of those that is tender and beautifully descriptive of this relationship between in a neighborhood in Italy, in Naples, and they're kind of growing up and time in this. Okay, the other one that I have picked up recently that's not a new book is Crucial Conversations, and am rereading that because I just and even as I'm rereading, I'm saying, "Oh my gosh, we in our culture and many of our work environments and even family environments and such struggle to say the hard things to each other in ways that are loving and honest and real." And this book is very practical and helpful, and understands that this is something that is needed in our relationships, inside and outside of work. So it's been really helpful recently.
Yeah, thanks. I confess when you said my brilliant friend, I thought you were getting ready to like say a name of somebody
Yes,
because
yes.
you have many brilliant friends that write books, but it is actually called My Brilliant Friend. So
It's actually called My
that's
Brilliant
good.
Friend.
Okay, final question. It's the one that we've asked all of our guests this season. Small boat. Again, back to that metaphor that's been so helpful for us. What's a small boat that you're seeing that gives us a glimpse of the future church, and maybe share a story about that boat, or how is it illustrating what God's doing through these fresh expressions right now? How about Kathi?
Um, well, as you know, I've been very interested in small churches. We start a small church initiative inside our work at Wesleyan Impact Partners, and learning about what makes flourishing small church. And also because I'm leading a small church now, pastoring, I've been reading a lot. And one of the books I've read is by Cara Root called The Deepest Belonging, about her small church in Minnesota. And um, in this book is so beautiful about this congregation that was transformed by its experience of walking alongside one of its members as he died. He was a fairly new person who had wandered into the church and became a member. He had no family, and this congregation became his family. And he, in exchange, agreed that he would be entirely transparent and vulnerable about his experience of approaching death. It was so lovely, and it struck me as exactly the work that congregations can do together. And so, among many small boats that we see out there, this is one that really captured me.
Yeah, thanks. That's so encouraging. And she, Cara, will be with one of our cohorts next year too, as we continue to explore kind of her perspective on real pastoral ministry and context. So yeah. Okay, Lisa, what about you? And I love how you sneaked in another book there. Well done. Okay,
Right?
go ahead, Lisa.
So there are so many I could describe in these moments, and I really encourage our listeners to go to our Wesleyan Impact Partners.org website and just tinker around a bit in our Locke Innovative Leader Award recipients, because their stories are so amazing, and so many of them are illustrative of this notion of a mixed ecology and small boats. But one I'll highlight just for this moment is Heber Brown and the Black Church Food Security Network, and it kind of seems like a big-ish boat today, but it's really a bunch of little small boats that are connected together in this network. And it started with a tiny, like really small little piece of land on their property that was kind of their back alley, backyard, and building or creating this community garden that then began to feed folks, especially during the pandemic, that then caught on with others who were thinking the same sorts of seeing the same sorts of needs with preventable disease, diabetes, um, and other nutrition related issues. And so just look up Heber Brown and the Black Church Food Security Network, and you'll see this amazing work of the Holy Spirit that has just caught on.
Thank you. Thank you all. This has been fun, right? Like,
This has been fun. We should do this
yeah,
again.
let's do it. I'd love to work with
I
you all.
love
That would be
that's
fun to work together. How about that? So,
that's
um,
what I was just about to say. I love getting to work with you both.
yeah, well,
You're
and thanks for
brilliant and amazing and fun.
great
Yeah.
insights and a great season. And yeah, thanks to our listeners who keep listening and tuning in and sharing their feedback with us. That helps shape the episodes that we do. So big thanks. All right.
Thank you, Blair, for all the background work. Really.
Sure. My privilege.